So I really warmly welcome you to this presentation on our paper, Choosing to Help Monsters, a mixed method examination of meaningful choices in narrative-rich games and interactive narratives. This project was done in collaboration together with my colleagues Sharon Steinemann, Klaus Opwis and myself. And yeah, I'm happy to present it today. Monster is blocking my slides, okay. Hopefully it goes away. Okay, so before we get started, let me explain you our definitions of meaningfulness and choices, so we are on the same page. There was to date not much empirical research. I saw that you found some of the choices in games, but we can talk about it later. So there was not much empirical research on meaningful choices in games, or specifically meaningful choices. There was no research, empirical one. So to help us understand these concepts, we looked at definitions across a broad area of fields. So when we talk about meaningfulness, we build strongly on research from media psychology by Oliver Barch, who coined the concept of appreciation of media experiences. Appreciated media experiences are considered meaningful, moving, and thought-provoking. So meaningful experiences in games have been associated with rich narratives, accomplishments, connection to other players or game characters, losses, and morally difficult situations. Rush understands meaningful game experiences as content related to the human condition. This is really broad, but it is mainly defined as deep, insightful, and purposeful experiences, especially when related to the player's personal life. When we talk about choices in narrative-rich games, we are referring to a very simple form of interactivity. With these in-game choices, players can explore possible manipulations of the game, thereby shaping the narrative that is ideally and uniquely and personally crafted to the player and their values and personalities. As the existence of this paper suggests, we assume that not all choices will be perceived as meaningful, but why should we care? Games, compared to less interactive forms of media, have a unique power to affect players in a way other media cannot. This is a power that in particular serious games are trying to tap. So for example, both the serious game and the interactive narrative version of Darfur is Dying led to players donating significantly more money to a welfare organization called Save Darfur than the non-interactive versions of the same content. Similarly, players of Spent significantly and stably improved their attitudes towards people who are homeless compared to a non-interactive newspaper article. However, for every study that finds an effect of interactivity, there seem to be a similar amount of studies finding mixed or no effects. So, for example, a large-scale pre-registered study on the interactive narrative How I Became Homeless found no effect on donating behavior. And another study examining a post-apocalyptic narrative found no difference in player experience between the interactive and the non-interactive narrative conditions. So, why do games sometimes have an effect and sometimes not? Obviously, understanding this is important to ensure that using games is not an often unfruitful gamble. This is where understanding what makes choices meaningful comes into play. Based on different theoretical arguments, among others by Ian Bogost, choices may only be effective compared to not having choices when these choices are meaningful. Supporting this are the findings that in both previously mentioned studies with no effects on experience or behavior, choices did not lead to a higher appreciation. This leads us to the first research question, which we explored in our first study, which is, what characteristics do players associate with meaningful choices in games? To investigate this question, we ran a qualitative online survey with 27 participants, mainly from the university, where participants were asked to answer the following questions. They had to name a game in which they experienced choices they perceived as meaningful. And second, they had to really describe in detail this choice and provide the reason why the choice was meaningful. This provided us with 27 accounts of 24 different games from a wide variety of genres. The answers were then coded using a qualitative, deductive thematic analysis approach by Clark, Brown, and Hayfield. This means that we familiarized ourselves with the content, created code categories based on previous concepts and ideas from literature, and in an iterative process, created overarching themes by clustering the code categories, which resulted in the following themes that I'd like to present you now. The first theme that emerged was that of consequential choices. This meant that meaningful choices were often described as being choices that had clear, often long-term and sometimes unexpected consequences, as in the following example from BioShock. Drugs are a precious resource for the player, and whenever you meet a little girl, a little sister, you have a chance to kill them and take all of the drugs they have on them. Or you can try to save them, collecting only half as much valuable drugs. The little sisters you save start leaving you presents throughout the world containing other valuable items. Their kindness reminds me that choosing the evil option to kill them for immediate gain isn't worth the cost of their lives. The second theme was social. The vast majority of reported meaningful choices included social aspects, as in the following example from Skyrim. And then there was the girl. I usually try to identify myself with my character. And me and the girl became friends. So joining the hunters would have meant letting her down, and I found her very friendly and cool. And I felt a bit sorry for her because she was threatened unfairly, so I wanted to help her. And the third and last overarching theme was moral. Not only did most choices mentioned by participants include a moral option, very often both options included moral aspects, creating a moral dilemma. Often this dilemma was about deciding between being loyal to one's own to one's own group, or choosing to help others. Often vulnerable outgroup members. As in this example from Metro 2033, where the player is confronted with monsters who potentially threaten humanity. I get to choose if they live or if they die, if they are no harm to humans, just simply misunderstood, and it's an immense moral decision where I have to evaluate my own values depending on my personal morals, and the ones I see that are practiced upon the rest of the post-apocalyptic society. Interestingly, in a majority of accounts, all three themes were presented in creating the meaningful choice. That's marked by the purple spot here. Coming back to research question number 1, our findings suggest that choices that clearly have consequences include social aspects and a moral dilemma and have clearly consequences that may be more clear or less clear and have lasting repercussions. And they are associated with meaningful choices in games. However, a mere association does not mean that adding these characteristics will causally lead to choices being perceived as meaningful. Therefore, we designed a second study to experimentally examine the causal relationship between adding and removing these characteristics and how this would affect perceived meaningfulness. Therefore, our second research question was as follows. Will the addition of the characteristics identified in study 1 as central to meaningful choices lead to higher appreciation. And beyond this, we also wanted to understand whether the effect of making a choice on appreciation would change based on the meaningfulness of the choice. Therefore, we formulated the third research question: will the effect of making a choice on appreciation change based on the meaningfulness of the choice? So, based on these findings of study 1, we created a narrative which we presented in 4 versions to experimentally manipulate choice and meaningfulness of the choice. The narrative followed an adventurer on a mission to find a magic flower, who encountered and befriended a werebear along the way. The story ended with the adventurer finding the flower guarded by a dragon, and having to choose whether to pick this flower or not. To manipulate meaningfulness, in the high meaningful conditions, the reason the adventurer wanted the flower was to save their dying mother. Furthermore, when confronted with the choice to pick the flower, they had to choose between saving their mother or their new best friend, the werebear. No matter which choice was made, the adventurer then had to live with the knowledge that they had chosen between the life as their friend or the one of their mother. Thereby, the choice included consequences as well as a moral dilemma in a social context, incorporating all of the 3 characteristics found in study 1. In the low meaningful conditions, these characteristics were mentioned. These were removed. The mother was not mentioned, and the flower simply promised strength. The werebear was never in danger, so no moral dilemma between saving the mother or the werebear was present. And if the adventurer did not pick the flower, they found another later on. To manipulate choice, half the participants could choose the ending, for example, between saving the mother or the werebear, and half the participants were presented with the ending without being able to choose it, as in a normal non-interactive story. This gave us a 2x2 experimental design with 4 different conditions: high meaningful choice present, high meaningful no choice present, low meaningful choice present, and low meaningful no choice present. We conducted this experiment with an online sample of 192 participants, recruited over Mechanical Turk and Reddit. Participants read a story in the version randomly assigned to them, then rated their experience with the story by filling out the questionnaires to appreciation, enjoyment, and narrative engagement. Additionally, we controlled for how important the moral foundation of not harming but caring for others was to participants. This was based on the moral foundation theory. And more on this you can find in our paper. To the results. So to examine our research question 2, we ran a 2-way analysis of covariance, for which we found a main effect for the meaningful conditions on appreciation, indicating that the addition of the 3 characteristics of study 1 did in fact lead to the experience being more meaningful. To examine research question 3, we further examined 3 contrasts, finding 1, a significant difference between the appreciation experienced in the choice compared to the no choice condition for the high meaningful narratives, no significant difference for choice versus no choice in the low meaningful conditions, and 3, the choice high meaningful condition led to a significantly more appreciated to a significantly higher appreciation than the other 3 conditions. Summarizing the findings, to all 3 research questions, we found that meaningful choices were associated with characteristics of clearly having consequences, moral dilemmas, and social aspects. And 2, that experimentally adding and removing these characteristics did lead to significant differences in experienced appreciation. And 3, that high meaningful and not low meaningful choices or no meaningful choice actually led to a more highly appreciated media experience. The implications of these findings are that merely adding choices to a game or interactive narrative is not enough to make the story itself more meaningful. This may help explain why some games are effective compared to other forms of media and others are not. In order to truly tap the potential of interactive media, the choice presented must be meaningful. Or in other words, don't just add choices, make sure they matter. Characteristics that can lead to meaningful choices are the presence of moral and social aspects with consequences. This was a first study aiming to explore meaningful choices in games. This is a fascinating area of research that certainly deserves further attention, and we would love to see further research exploring the topics in more nuance. For now, the central finding of the study is that making a choice had an effect on appreciation only in the high meaningful condition. This supports that the argument that adding a choice as a form of narrative interactivity is not a silver bullet. It suggests that choices may only be effective when the player experiences them as meaningful. We leave you with these first findings and are happy to take your questions.
Hi there, Josh Miller, Northeastern University. Do you have any information on whether the consequential, social, moral characteristics interact with each other, or if one contributes to meaningfulness more than another? Any nuance like that, or is that for future research?
This is really good input. That's what we actually also plan to do, but then we recognize that it's too much for now. So yeah, we plan to do that in the future. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter Mahorter from MIT. I have a similar question, which is I've seen research showing that you can not actually give players choices, but make it seem like they have choices by providing feedback after they make a choice, which doesn't actually affect the story. And I'm curious how you think that that jives with your own research. Do you think that if you took away that impact component, but tried to fake it, it would still work, or do you think that it wouldn't?
This is a really good thought. We were also thinking about that, and then we actually looked at, because we had 8 different endings of the story, and we did look at the differences, and within the meaningful conditions and the low meaningful conditions, there was no difference actually. So it doesn't really matter what kind of ending it really is, but it's more of maybe the autonomy or whatever they feel during choosing. That is probably important. Yeah.
Hi. I just missed the first question, so maybe you already answered that. When you described the consequences of the action in your narrative, you said that it was about living with the choice that you've made. So basically it wasn't a part of the narrative that you were experiencing, but rather something like post-game. So do you think that there might be a difference when it matters for future like gameplay that you have made this choice, or that it's simply all in your mind?
Do you mean outside with living?
Yeah, that the consequence was basically just living with what you decided, contrasted with it actually affected gameplay or how the story progressed.
So if I understood you correctly, there could be an effect on outside of the gameplay, or just that it would last? Because
no, the way you described it, it was that it would last in the player's mind, but it didn't impact the way you played the game till the end, or the way the content was presented to you. So would that make an additional consequential impact, or is it just it doesn't matter if it's just in the player's mind or also in the game mechanics?
So for the experiment in the second study, we cannot say that because the choice was at the end of the story. So we do not really know how they would have played later on. That would be really good for future research. For study 1, we found some associations or comments of the players that when they had this meaningful choice. For example, it was, I think, in Harry Potter, where they were were at the point where they really were challenged and they didn't know what to decide, and then it affected this person that they actually tried and tried again, and then they were so frustrated that they stopped playing any game. So they were like, oh no, I think I'm not so good at gaming, so I actually don't game ever. So it's more like it could be even outside. And I think, yeah, in other incidents, I think it might affect how they will play, because, yeah, it's the consequence that are coming. So.